The kitchen smelled faintly of vanilla candles, and Emily's hands trembled as she tied a thin golden ribbon around a wine glass. Tomorrow was not just any night, it was Daniel's birthday, and she had promised herself it would be different, unforgettable, and daring in a way she had never imagined before. 10 years of marriage had taught her many things about love, how it could be steady, like a river, warm like a fireplace, and sometimes fragile, like glass. She remembered all the times Daniel had gone out of his way to make her feel special surprise. Weekend trips, little notes left in her bag, or even the way he still reached for her hand in crowded places. Tonight, it was her turn. She wanted to give him something that would not just be a gift, but a memory carved into the deepest part of his soul. Her idea had been growing quietly inside her for months, and though it scared her, it also thrilled. She had decided she would not be the only one at Daniel's side tonight. She wanted to bring Sophia and Claire, her two closest friends, into this moment. It wasn't about games or recklessness. It was about love in its boldest form, about testing if trust could be expanded rather than broken, about seeing if joy could multiply instead of divide. She knew how Daniel's eyes softened whenever Sophia laughed too hard at her own jokes. And she had noticed the way he listened so intently to Claire's stories, the kind of listening only a man with a gentle heart could give. Instead of jealousy, Emily felt curiosity. Instead of fear, she felt the pull of a question she wanted answered. What if love could be shared without being lost? Her friends, though hesitant at first, had agreed. They trusted Emily, and they knew this was not about betrayal, but about connection. Still, she could not ignore the weight pressing on her chest. What if she was wrong? What if this night, planned with so much heart, ended with regret? She shook the thought away and poured herself a small glass of wine, needing courage. The house was glowing with candlelight, soft music played low in the background, and the table was set as if for a quiet, romantic dinner. To Daniel, it would appear that way at first. Only later would he realize that tonight was something entirely different. Emily leaned against the counter, remembering the early days of their marriage. Daniel had always been the dreamer, the man who wanted to see more, do more, live more. She had been the anchor, the one who steadied him when his ideas floated too high. They balanced each other, and that balance had kept them strong. Lately, she had sensed a quiet longing in him, not dissatisfaction, but a hunger for something more vibrant. Maybe it was age, maybe it was routine, maybe it was simply human nature. Whatever it was, she wanted to meet it head-on rather than ignore it. The decision to involve Sophia and Claire had not come lightly. Sophia, with her wild laughter and easy charm, had been Emily's college roommate. She was bold, confident, and magnetic, the kind of woman who lit up every room. Claire was different, gentle, thoughtful, an artist who spoke with her eyes as much as her words. Both had been like sisters to Emily, and both carried qualities she knew Daniel admired. That admiration had never been threatening. Instead, it had planted a thought inside Emily that refused to fade. What if I give him something that shows him love isn't about walls, but about doors we open together? She had spoken to Sophia first. They sat in a small cafe in Portland, rain tapping against the windows. "You want me to do what?" Sophia had laughed, almost choking on her coffee. But when Emily explained, her voice calm and steady, Sophia's smile faded into something more serious. "Emily, that's brave. Scary, but brave. Are you sure Daniel is ready for something like that?" "I don't know if he's ready," Emily admitted. "But I know he deserves something extraordinary. He's given me so much, Sophia. This is my way of giving him something no one else could." Sophia had been silent for a long moment before nodding. "If it means that much to you, I'll be there." Claire had been even more hesitant. She had always been private, quiet, almost shy. When Emily told her, Claire's face had flushed deep red. "Emily, this could change everything." "What? If it hurts you instead of making you stronger?" Emily reached across the table and held her hand. "Claire, I trust him. And I trust you. I want him to feel what it's like to be surrounded by people who care for him in ways words can't explain. I want him to see that love is more than just rules. It's a choice we keep making every day, even when it's hard. Claire had finally agreed, though her eyes carried the weight of 1,000 questions. Now, standing in her kitchen, Emily could hear her heart pounding. The candles flickered and the clock ticked closer to the hour Daniel would walk through the door. She imagined his face when he saw Sophia and Claire there. He would be confused, maybe even worried. But she would take his hand, look him in the eyes, and let him know this was not a mistake. This was love her loved during to show itself, in a way most people would never understand. The night was set, the stage prepared. And Emily whispered to herself, "Please, let this be beautiful." Because as much as she wanted to give Daniel the best gift of his life, she also wanted to prove to herself that love could stretch, bend, and still remain unbroken. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped her back to the moment. Daniel was home. The story of this night was about to begin, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. Asterisk the sky above. Seattle was painted in shades of pink and gold when Daniel pulled into the driveway, his tie loosened, his shoulders heavy from a long day. He expected a quiet evening with Emily, maybe a simple dinner and a slice of cake. But as soon as he stepped through the door, the warm glow of candles and the faint sound of music told him something was different. The house felt alive, like it was holding its breath. "Happy birthday." Emily greeted him with a smile that was both nervous and shining. She kissed his cheek, her lips lingering a second longer than usual. Daniel noticed the table set perfectly, with wine glasses, soft linens, and little touches of gold. His heart lifted. After years together, she still had this way of surprising him. But before he could ask about the night, the doorbell rang. Emily's eyes flickered, and she squeezed his hand before walking to the door. When it opened, Daniel froze. Standing, there was Sophia Millie's college friend. She stepped in with her signature confidence, her laughter carrying across the room like a melody. She wore a deep blue dress that caught the light, and in her hands she carried a small wrapped gift. "Daniel, happy birthday," she said warmly, leaning in for a hug. Daniel blinked, surprised but polite. He liked Sophia, everyone did. She had a way of making even the dullest rooms feel electric. Still, he couldn't help but wonder what she was doing. Here tonight he looked at Emily, but she only smiled, her eyes calm, almost secretive. Minutes later, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Claire. She walked in quietly, her presence soft but unmistakable. Claire was the opposite of Sophia Gentle, reserved with an artist's depth in her eyes. She carried a sketchbook tied with a ribbon. "Happy birthday, Daniel," she said softly, her voice almost like a song. Daniel's heart raced. First Sophia, now Claire. He turned to Emily, searching for answers, but she only took his hand and whispered, "Tonight is different. Tonight, I want to give you something you'll never forget." Her words sank into him like a stone dropping into water. He didn't know whether to feel joy or fear. He glanced at Sophia and Claire, both settling in as if they belonged there, their laughter and voices filling the room. Dinner began with wine poured into tall glasses, candles flickering in the corners, and soft music humming in the background. Sophia told funny stories from their college days, making everyone laugh. Claire showed Daniel the sketch she had drawn for him, a charcoal piece of a lighthouse against a stormy sea. He was touched deeply, because she had captured something of him in that drawing. The quiet strength he often hid. Emily watched him closely, her eyes shining with love. She wasn't nervous anymore. She was glowing. Every time Daniel looked at her, she gave him a reassuring smile, as if saying, "Trust me." Still, Daniel's mind spun. Why were they here? Why had Emily arranged this? He tried to read her, but her expression held a mystery he couldn't solve. As the evening went on, something shifted. The air grew heavier, charged with unspoken feelings. Sophia leaned closer when she laughed, her hand brushing Daniel's arm once, casually but lingering. Claire's eyes found his more than once across the table, steady, almost searching. Through it all, Emily remained calm, her hands sometimes resting on Daniel's, grounding him, reminding him that this was no accident. At one point, Sophia turned serious. "Emily, are you sure?" she asked softly, her voice carrying more meaning than the words alone. Emily nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, this is exactly what I want." Daniel felt his heart thump hard in his chest. He looked at his wife, trying to understand. He had expected cake and maybe a small gift. Instead, he was sitting with Emily and her two closest friends in a room glowing with more than candlelight. Something deeper was happening, something he couldn't yet name. He felt both nervous and alive, like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, the wind rushing against him. The women around him weren't just guests. They were part of something Emily had planned, something that involved him in ways he could not yet grasp. As the meal ended, Sophia poured another round of wine, her smile playful. "To Daniel," she said, raising her glass. To the man of the night, Claire followed, lifting hers gently. And to Emily, she added softly, for always knowing how to surprise him. They clinked glasses, and Daniel sat back, his throat tight. He wanted to speak, to ask Emily what this all meant, but every time he tried, she gave him that same look, calm, certain, loving. The night deepened. The conversation grew slower, more meaningful. The candles burned lower, the wine bottles emptied, and laughter gave way to silence filled with possibility. Daniel could feel it. Something was building. Then Emily leaned close, her lips near his ear, her voice barely a whisper. "This is your gift, Daniel. It's not just me, but the people you admire, the people you care for. I want you to feel what it's like to be loved in a way words can't explain." Her words sent shivers through him. He looked at her, at Sophia, at Claire. His chest tightened with wonder and fear. Was this real? Was this allowed? Emily squeezed his hand again, her eyes steady. "Trust me," she said, and in that moment, Daniel realized he stood on the edge of a night that could change everything. It could either break them apart or bind them together forever. The candles flickered. The room grew quiet, and the story of his birthday gift was only just beginning. Asterix, the music had shifted from light background tunes to something slower, deeper, a song that carried a rhythm meant for silence and closeness. The plates had been cleared, the candles burned low, and the air in the room was no longer just warm, it was charged. Daniel sat at the edge of the sofa, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind trying to catch up with everything that had unfolded. This was not just dinner. This was not just friendship. Emily had set something in motion, and he could feel it moving toward him like a tide he could not stop. Sophia was the first to break the quiet tension. She leaned back in her chair, her smile softer now, stripped of its playful edges. "Emily," she said gently, "you need to tell him. He deserves to know what tonight really is." Daniel turned sharply to his wife, searching her eyes. Emily didn't look away. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling just enough for him to feel it. "Daniel," she whispered, "I wanted to give you something no one else could. Tonight is not just about me and you. It's about trust, about love, about seeing what happens when we let our hearts stretch wider than the world tells us to." His throat tightened. He didn't speak. Couldn't he? Looked at Sophia, then Claire, then back at Emily. "I don't understand," he said finally, his voice low. Uneven. Emily leaned closer, her eyes never leaving his. "You've always been the one giving me surprises, showing me I'm loved in ways that leave me breathless. Tonight, I want to give that to you. I want you to feel surrounded not just by me, but by the people I trust the most. I want you to see that love isn't about cages. It's about freedom, about choosing each other again and again, even when it's hard." Daniel felt dizzy. It was too much, too fast. But when he looked at her, he didn't see recklessness. He saw devotion. She wasn't offering him temptation. She was offering him a piece of herself. Her heart laid bare in a way he never imagined. Sophia moved closer, her eyes flickering with both courage and hesitation. Emily asked me to be here, Daniel. Not to take anything from you, not to steal, but to give. It's to help her show you what love can look like when fear isn't in the way. It's clear, quieter but no less certain, added, we're here because we love her, and because she believes in you enough to share something this rare. The weight of their words pressed into Daniel's chest. He could feel the heat in his skin, the rush in his blood. He looked back at Emily, desperate for clarity. But why? Why would you give me this? Her answer was simple, her voice steady. Because you deserve to feel everything I've felt with you. Because you're my husband, my partner, and I trust you more than I trust anyone in this world. Silence fell thick and full of meaning. Daniel's heart raced, his mind screaming questions he couldn't form. But under it all there was a strange, undeniable, Pula sense of wonder, of possibility, of something forbidden yet sacred. Sophia reached for his glass, refilled it with wine, and pressed it gently into his hand. Relax, she said softly. Tonight isn't about pressure, it's about being present. Claire nodded, her eyes never leaving his. It's about letting love show up in ways you never expected. Daniel took a shaky sip, the wine warm against his tongue. He glanced at Emily, who smiled at him with such pure affection that it broke something inside him. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't jealous. She was sure enough to share what most people would cling to. The music swelled, the candles flickered, and time seemed to slow. Emily shifted closer to him, her hand resting firmly on his chest. Do you feel it? She whispered. This isn't about losing me. This is about me showing you that my love is strong enough to expand, not shatter. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. What if it changes us? Her eyes softened, tears glimmering but not falling. Then we change together, or we learn together. But we don't let fear decide for us. Sophia leaned forward, her laughter gone now, replaced by something raw and sincere. Daniel, you've got the kind of love most people spend their whole lives chasing. Don't be afraid of it just because it looks different tonight. Claire placed her sketchbook on the table, her voice quiet but steady. I drew that lighthouse for you because it reminded me of Emily, how she's always guiding, always steady, no matter how wild the sea gets. Tonight is one of those storms, but she's still here, holding the light. Daniel's chest tightened, painfully. He looked at his wife, his best friend, the woman who had built her world around him, and all he saw was bravery. Not recklessness, not betrayal bravery. She was daring to trust him with more than he thought he could hold. He covered her hand with his own, gripping it tightly. I'm scared, he admitted. Emily leaned closer, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered. So am I, but love without risk isn't really love at all. The words sank into him, heavy and unshakable. He glanced at Sophia and Claire, two women who weren't here to divide, but to join, to make this night something beyond ordinary. And for the first time, he began to see it not as a threat, but as a gift. A gift Emily had crafted from trust, courage, and love that dared to go beyond boundaries. The music slowed again, and Emily stood, holding out her hand to him. Come with me, she said simply. He rose, his body trembling, his heart unsure, but his trust in her stronger than his fear as he followed her into the center of the room. Sophia and Claire watched with quiet anticipation, their eyes carrying both tenderness and respect. The night was no longer about food or wine or small talk. It was about stepping into a space none of them had been before. Daniel's hand tightened around Emily's. And in that moment, he knew the truth. This was not about desire alone, not about temptation, but about love testing its own limits. And as much as it scared him, he felt a spark of something undeniable: curiosity, wonder, even hope. The night was only halfway over, and already it had shifted into something unforgettable. But deep inside, a question still lingered like a shadow. In the corner, would this gift unite them forever? Would it leave cracks that could never be repaired? The first light of morning spilled through the curtains, soft and golden, touching everything in the room with quiet warmth. The candles had long burned out, the glasses sat empty, and the echoes of laughter and whispered words still seemed to linger in the air. Daniel stirred awake slowly, his body heavy but his heart strangely light. The night had been unlike anything he could have imagined, a mixture of fear, joy, and discovery that still hummed inside his chest like a secret he could not put into words. Beside him, Emily was asleep, her face turned toward him, her hand resting gently on his chest. Even in sleep, she looked steady, calm, as if she had carried them both through a storm and brought them to shore. He reached up and touched her hair, brushing a strand from her face, and felt a surge of emotion so strong it almost hurt. Could one woman love him this much, enough to risk everything, just to show him a new way of being close? The house was quiet, but he knew Sophia and Claire had already left. Their presence, though, was still here, like perfume hanging in the air. After a party, delicate and impossible to ignore, he thought about the way Sophia had laughed, bold and unafraid even in the strangeness of the night. He thought about Claire, her quiet strength, the way her eyes seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken truths. And he thought of Emily, the heart of it all, the reason the night had not been chaos, but instead something deeper, something meaningful. He closed his eyes for a moment, replaying the whispers, the confessions. It's the raw honesty that had filled the late hours. No walls, no masks, just for people daring to open themselves to something bigger than rules. It hadn't been about betrayal or recklessness or losing control. It had been about trust, about choosing to step outside fear and into something uncertain but real. Emily stirred then, her eyes blinking open, hazy with sleep but soft with love. She smiled faintly when she saw him awake, her voice rough but tender. "Good morning," he whispered back, his hand still on her cheek. He wanted to speak, to tell her everything he felt, but his throat was tight. She seemed to understand anyway. "Are you angry with me?" she asked, her voice small, almost fragile. He shook his head quickly. "No, God, no. I don't even know how to describe what I feel. But angry? Never?" Tears welled in her eyes, though her smile grew. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "Afraid you wouldn't understand, afraid it would hurt us. But I wanted you to really know that my love for you isn't small. It's bigger than fear. I wanted to give you a night you'd never forget." Daniel pulled her closer, his arms tight around her, his voice breaking. "You did. Emily, you gave me more than a gift. You gave me trust. You showed me a kind of love I didn't even know existed." She buried her face against his chest, and for a long time they stayed like that, tangled together in silence. The morning sun slowly warming the room. Later, as they sat at the kitchen table with mugs of coffee, the world felt almost normal again. The smell of fresh toast filled the air, the sound of birds drifted in from outside. And yet both of them knew nothing was quite the same. Sophia and Claire were gone, back to their own lives, but the night had tied them all together in a way that would never completely fade. Emily broke the silence first. "This was never meant to change everything," she said carefully. "It wasn't about starting something new or chasing something dangerous. It was about showing you how deeply I trust you. It was one night, one gift, one memory. Nothing more." Daniel nodded, relief softening his face. "I know, and I don't need more. What we have, just you and Ms., more than enough. But I'll carry last night with me forever because it showed me something. It showed me how strong we are." She smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand. Stronger than fear, he repeated, squeezing her fingers. The day stretched ahead of them, ordinary and calm. Yet underneath the surface was a new layer of closeness, a quiet bond forged by their daring. They would go back to their routines: work, friends, errands, late-night talks, but the memory of that night would live between them like a secret flame. It wasn't something they would tell others. It wasn't something anyone else would ever truly understand. It belonged only to them. As the hours passed, Daniel found himself watching Emily with a new kind of awe. The way she moved around the kitchen, humming softly, her hair falling loose around her shoulders, it was all the same. And yet he saw her differently now. Not just as his wife, not just as the woman he had loved for a decade, but as someone fearless enough to risk everything.